Hello my friends, and welcome back to another video where today we will be discussing what is the saddest moment in The Lord of the Rings. The primary focus will be on the books and source material, but stills from the movies will be used to provide context while at the same time being useful in the supporting cases of each moment. As firstly, how do we define and apply the term saddest to all these events and be able to conclude that a specific event in The Lord of the Rings was the saddest moment? Well, it will be split into three components: the impact the moment had on the actual characters in the book, then the effect it had on the reader, which is where the use of the films might come in as it is an adaptation by readers, and finally, how this moment affected the plot and story. We will be discussing presumably the main ones in today's video, and then see if we can find a justified conclusion and answer at the end. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Death undoubtedly will always be a sad moment, especially to not a fully tragic character but more of a conflicted person, which Boromir at times clearly was. Boromir symbolized the weaknesses of men, such as proudness and unrivaled desire, which potentially was purposeful by Tolkien to display how easily the power and corruption of the One Ring could be inflicted on a mortal soul. Which is why his eventual death, technically at the beginning of the Two Towers, was so impactful. Despite the flaws of Boromir, the Fellowship still accompanied and supported him even at his demise, which makes his death even more tragic. The moment Boromir blew the horn and signalled that he was in danger, Aragorn cried, quote, "The horn of Boromir, he is in need." Consequently, he, quote, "sprang down the steps and away, leaping down the path." The matter of Boromir still meant a lot to the Fellowship and especially Aragorn. Of course, beforehand due to temptation, Boromir tried to get the ring off Frodo moments earlier, and these ill actions summarise his character, as then he later on tried to defend Merry and Pippin, the halflings, from the orcs, as he mentions on his deathbed, quote, "They have gone, the halflings, the orcs have taken them." The will and desire to still defend the hobbits truly shows the sadness of the soul of Boromir. Even the state he was found in, with having been, quote, "pierced with many black feathered arrows, his sword still in his hand, but it was broken near the hilt," end quote, and there were many orcs laying beside him, so it does seem like he had a warrior's death. Now, as mentioned earlier, what effect does Boromir's death have on the characters in the book and at that moment? Firstly, guilt of not being there to support him. Moments after Boromir's death, to Legolas, Aragorn even stated, quote, "I am unscathed, for I was not here with him." The grief and pain of not being able to support your fellow kinsman in his final moments had a heavy emotional toll on Aragorn, with another impact being pain, as he was weeping, still clasping Boromir's hand as described in the books. The guilt extended to Legolas as well, who also admitted, quote, "We should have been of more use here." The immediate death and consequences of Boromir's passing held a great toll on the remaining Fellowship members. Undoubtedly, the sadness of his death extended of course to Denethor, his father as well, who had just lost his firstborn and heir. In coalition with the Jackson movies, Boromir's on-screen death was quite fitting and translated the honour of Boromir and his bravery. The movies fully showed how Boromir was eventually found in the books, quote, "Many orcs lay slain, piled all about him and his feet." Of course, Jackson did not adapt every sense perfectly from the books to movies overall, but Boromir's adaptation showed the sadness of his death, as one minute he's taking the ring from Frodo, but then the next minute he is defending the halflings and his honor. We have looked at sadness through tragedy and death, but at the departing at the Grey Havens, we see emotional and sentimental sadness. In the end, when Frodo passed the Red Book over to Sam, and the emotional moment of him stating, quote, "The last pages are for you," reflects sadness in the sense that this whole journey for however long pages is coming to an end, and we have the beginning of the realization that things between Sam and Frodo can't stay the same forever. Then, at the Grey Havens itself, it was emotional and heartbreaking, which leads into sadness, especially when Gandalf uttered the famous lines, quote, "Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea, come the end of our fellowship. Do not weep, for not all tears are an evil," end quote. The last bit, "for not all tears are an evil," perfectly encompasses the meaning that this moment is heartrending and emotive, which does lead to sadness of the growing realization of the finalization of this story. Which is why, for our third factor of how it affects the plot, it is a heart-wrenching conclusion, not only for the characters, but for the readers as well, who have been on the same journey as all of them, and are experiencing the same final moments that Frodo and Sam had when Frodo kissed Sam's brow, the epitome of masculine love and friendship. To latch onto this, it also feels like the end of an age, as we see the departure of many established and veteran Middle-earth characters, such as Galadriel, who finally is able to go west, along with Celeborn, and of course Elrond. So far, we have seen sadness through regret and pain, then heartbreaking moments and sentimental values. But now, the grief shown through Gandalf's demise and fall at the hands of the Balrog at Khazad-dûm is the epitome of sadness in all aspects. Throughout the story, from when we first met him in the cart full of fireworks at the Shire, leading the Fellowship through turmoil, being the figure of support for Frodo, Gandalf is pivotal to all characters, which is why his death is even sadder. Before we continue, I know Gandalf does come back to life and his role in the story continues, but we are looking at this from someone reading or watching his demise without knowing his true fate and the fact that he would come back. The company stood rooted, with horror staring into the pit. Frodo heard Sam at his side weeping, and then he found that he himself was weeping as he ran. This disbelief and shock from Gandalf's fall truly echoes how influential he was to these characters, and why his death is the saddest moment in The Lord of the Rings. For the readers, Gandalf was the one everyone would go to and had the wisdom and power of a Maya to get out of certain situations, but most importantly was there for Frodo and Sam, supporting and entrusting them. Quote, "All that we have to decide is what to do with the time given us." The loss of Gandalf for Frodo, Sam, the Fellowship and the readers is incomparable, especially with the levels of grief being shown. Quote, "Grief overcame them and they wept long, some standing and silent, some cast upon the ground." Even for the story, we know that Gandalf comes back, but for Frodo and Sam, throughout their journey, they are carrying this level of guilt and remorse and belief that Gandalf had gone, and the level of security and support he had provided had vanished just like that, and now they are on their own to finish this quest. Which is why personally, Gandalf's demise is the saddest moment in The Lord of the Rings. Even though Boromir's passing was truly impactful, especially on Aragorn and the context of his state at the time of death, by being so conflicted, handing more to that argument as well. Of course, there are many sad moments in The Lord of the Rings, with some being events and moments and some not, like the eventual realization by Frodo of the fate of his journey, etc. But technically that isn't a moment. Or for example, we have King Theoden's death at the Pelennor Fields. But please let me know in the comments below what you think the saddest moment is in The Lord of the Rings. Thank you guys for watching, I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. But until the next video my friends, goodbye.